Coming up on this week's show, how you can own the rarest arcade cabinet ever.
A new Mario movie is on the way.
And we talked to Brian Baglow about GTA and the rise of Rockstar.
This week's show is brought to you by Packed Coffee, flexible coffee plans delivered to your door.
Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 242, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Rabbi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And great to have you joining us for another Geek Out session all about retro gaming and video games from way back in the day, technology, and all the stories that have been happening over the last 7 days in the world of retro. Actually, I was reading a story that was all over the news this week, a new report that Spotify have done, and apparently, over the summer on Spotify, they've seen a massive rise in people listening to 80s and 90s music, essentially because I think, people want to escape 2020.
So they're just trying to get into this euphoria of they're not in the year 2020.
So I think that's where we fit in, a little bit of escapism for the next hour or so. We can relive those golden days, of video games back in the day. And also, we're joined by a special guest like we are every week. Now, today we're going to be joined by someone who was behind one of the biggest gaming franchises, not only back then, but also continuing today as well. We're going to be joined by Brian Baglow, who of course was at DMA and then at Rockstar as well.
Yeah, so we've had Mike Daly on the show before, and Mike was the kind of programming genius behind GTA 1, the original Grand Theft Auto. And this week we've got Brian Baglow on. Now, Brian was the actual writer for it, so he did a lot of the ideas for missions. You may remember there was a lot of kind of Dirty Harry style gangsters in there that you would meet, and you needed a reason to go around nicking these cars. But also he did some additional audio for it and whipped up the controversy. So he was doing the PR for the whole of Grand Theft Auto. And if you remember, that campaign was absolutely mental. It was in the news, like the most controversial game that ever came out. So he worked on GTA 1 and 2 doing that, and then moved on to Rockstar. And now he's working with the Scottish Games Network. So we're going to talk Scottish gaming a bit, because the home of GTA was in Scotland, of course.
Yeah, and if you're talking about games that had a massive impact in, video game history, because the 90s, it was an interesting time because obviously we had stuff like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap that were responsible for bringing in the age ratings. But then when GTA came out, I just remember all the Mary Whitehouse Brigade, as they were back then, just going into a meltdown over that game.
And also the soundtrack was really amazing because it was the first time you had that kind of full CD audio, and they really used it. So they had the radio stations where you could get into a car and there were all different varieties of music, and that standard has kind of gone on to lots of other games and stuck with the GTA series really until today.
So Brian Baglow is going to be our guest. We'll talk all about the inside story on GTA 1 and 2, life at DMA Designs and Rockstar, and much more. He'll be on the show in around 20 minutes from now. Now, let's get straight into the stories this week, because actually there's been so much Nintendo news, and something that had Joe practically wetting himself with excitement. They are going to be making another Mario movie. But will it be as good as your favourite film ever, Super Mario Brothers?
No, it won't be. I love that. You always drop me in it like Joe's been wetting himself, he's been frothing for this, stuff like
You
that.
have, don't lie.
So I saw this, funny enough, I was watching the PlayStation 5 launch video thing last night, and funny enough, I saw the Mario movie news pop up while I was watching that, and I was like, oh, Nintendo are trying to drop some news while PlayStation are as well. So yeah, this is really cool. I'm guessing it's coming off the back of the success of the Sonic the Hedgehog film.
Yeah.
But essentially, Nintendo announced yesterday, it's come from their corporate management policy briefing, that they are making a Super Mario movie, which is set for release in 2022. And that Shigeru, I'm going to say his name now, Miyamoto, I'll just say that.
Just a surname term. That's
just the surname terms, that's all we're on at the moment. He is producing it, and he does have a hand in the story, and he's got a hand in the production and everything like that. So hopefully it will be legit. And it's being brought to us by, is it Illuminati? They're called? Not Illuminati, Illumination.
The Illuminati.
Being brought to us by the Illuminati.
Joe's starting rumours now.
It's being brought to us by Illumination, who's the company behind Minions and stuff like that. So I'm assuming it's gonna be a little bit like Sonic the Hedgehog film, kind of fart jokey and stuff like that. And I'm assuming it's probably going to be an animated film. they'll say it's like live action, but it'll be like the Lion King film where it's CGI, if that makes sense. I reckon.
Yeah.
According to this article, it does say it's animated, actually.
Okay, that's
an
cool.
animated
So,
Nintendo.
yeah,
I think it's interesting having Miyamoto on board because he's always kind of ensured a high quality with Mario. So I think his standard of high quality is actually going to go through this. So maybe we won't get a really kind of cheap one done.
Well,
they've only done it once, and that was big budget before, wasn't it?
And the guy who, I forget his name, but the founder of Illumination has said, he's got his hand in it as well. And he said, he's kind of glad that the Mario film was made in 1993 because now they can one-up it. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not going to be too hard to one-up critics.
Yeah, try and one-up what most people class as one of the worst movies ever made.
Exactly.
Yeah, set your ambitions a bit higher.
Exactly.
So, will you miss Bob Hoskins in this new movie then?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I wonder if they're going to get, what's his name? The voice actor for Mario.
Oh, Charles Martinet.
Yeah, there we go. Charles Martinet. We got there eventually. I'm interested to see if he's going to be the voice of Mario.
Oh, he's got to be. They can't change the voice.
They're going to go for a proper voice talent. Do you know what I mean? Like a proper superstar or something.
What about Danny DeVito instead?
When I was a kid, I always got Danny DeVito and Bob Hoskins confused.
Yeah,
so
totally.
did I, actually.
So there you go. We're finally getting a movie that hopefully will do Mario a bit of justice. After the Sonic movie, which actually there's a new Sonic movie in production now, isn't there? They're making a follow-up to that.
Yeah, they're making a follow-up to it, aren't they? So maybe there'll be that'll be out in 2022 as well, and there'll be playground discussions again. Which one's better?
Mario versus Sonic, like going back to 1990 all over again.
You know what? They could actually do a really good marketing campaign with that.
Yeah, like we've been friends for 20 years, but not now.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Well, actually, we recorded a couple of shows together before last week. So I had a week off last week, which was lovely, just, recharge my batteries and everything. But it did mean that we missed out on the massive Super Mario 3D news that I think actually, it literally broke about half an hour after we finished recording the second show. But, I mean, at the time this show comes out on Friday, the games are going to be out. Super Mario 3D All-Stars, of course, going to be 3 games in there. So you've got Mario 64, Galaxy, Sunshine as well. And a lot of people have been really excited about this. But actually, there have been a few leaks a bit earlier on this week. And some people reckon that there's something a little bit not all that good about this. So apparently it's running on like an emulation platform or something.
Yeah, so what made me laugh about this was, I can't remember which one of us posted it in the group chat, but it was literally half an hour, like you say, after we'd finished recording. And I remember Ravi was just like, yeah, it'll be emulation straight away. And he's always bloody right on these things. So somebody called Oatmeal Dome has reported that it leaked about a week ago, a couple of days early. And essentially it's all kind of running on emulation. So Mario 64 is running on an N64 emulator on the Switch. And then Galaxy and Sunshine are running on a Wii emulator. However, with that in mind, Galaxy, even though it's running it's running on the Switch hardware, but then the audio is running through the emulator, which I think is really strange. So I don't really know why they're doing that.
They found this out because they kind of looked at the original code and saw what was happening, and it was loading ROMs essentially.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because there's that Wii and GameCube emulator, but then there's also this N64 one, and it makes me think maybe this is just a cheap, quick job by Nintendo. And also, I found it really interesting that they're limiting numbers of this release, and I was thinking, why are they limiting numbers? Is it because the factories aren't available at COVID to print that many? There's a limit on the physical print numbers, but then I noticed they're going to limit the online digital version as well,
which is crazy.
Yeah, which was really confusing for me. But ultimately, I think they might be able to, use this as an exploit to put other ROMs inside.
I was literally, as you were explaining that, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if they're testing the water to then kind of branch out for more kind of ROMs and stuff like that to go online, in the eShop and stuff like that.
Well, they've always been scared of the virtual console, and this kind of shows that there isn't much of a virtual console going on if they're using emulators. So they've probably not got that function, but they've been really worried about opening the Switch up to these kind of things because they want to sell these titles individually, don't they? They want to sell the N64 stuff individually. So it could be really interesting, just like that PS4 one that we covered recently, where they found a bit of code actually in there that was just loading up an emulator, and they managed to get other stuff into the PlayStation 1 emulator.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see once the game is out. Like you say, like Dan says, we're recording this on the Thursday, so it'll be out by the time this episode's out on the Friday. But be interesting to see in the next couple of weeks, once more people get their hands on it, how many people are kind of going to, open it up and stuff like that and see what's going on and play around with the ROMs. And, before we know it, we'll probably have Galaxy 2 running in the ROM and stuff like that.
Now, I've heard, Joe, that a few people are saying this is going to be the worst. Like, the way that they've done this with the code is this is going to be the worst ported or coded thing for the Switch.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they're saying it's so lazy by just putting the emulator thing on. So I don't know if is this a weird approach from Nintendo? Have they just dropped quality for this release? Or?
Yeah, hopefully it's just a one-off, or hopefully there's something more to it, like you say. And I don't know, it's a bit of a strange one, to be honest. But I think, if I read rightly, it's been handled by Nintendo of Europe or something like that.
Okay.
So I don't know whether that's had something to do with it. So
I think there's some kind of COVID effect that's going on here that they're not talking about, that somehow made them rush it or affected production.
I mean, being Nintendo game players for decades now, we all know that Nintendo generally does have quite a high bar when it comes to quality control. I mean, the fact that it is emulation means that they're going to play like the originals, I guess. And I mean, there are a lot of people who are complaining that, that wish it was actually full HD kind of remakes, for like modern platforms, which would have been nicer. But some people are also saying, it's quite curious that they're actually picking the original Nintendo 64 version, which obviously had, some problems with the camera that often got stuck on there as well. And there was actually a remake for the DS, wasn't there, a few years ago?
Yeah,
some people are like, why didn't they just use that version?
Yeah.
Yeah, so why wasn't it like, a more recent version, for example, than the Nintendo 64 one? So, yeah, it is quite curious. I mean, looking at it, I imagine the graphics are going to be upscaled. It's not going to be running at like, Nintendo 64 resolution through Blur-O-Vision.
Yeah, that'd be quite funny if that was the case. I'd be really lazy.
Yeah, instead of a CRT filter, a blur filter.
We'll soon find out.
Yeah, well, it's going to be out, today when the show comes out. So I'll be giving it a download and play this weekend. I'll give you my thoughts next week. Now, something else that I know you've been quite hyped for, a retro shooter, Rise of the Triad. We've talked about this before on the show. This is now getting a remaster as well. Yeah,
so Rise of the Triad was a really interesting title. It was basically the follow-up of Wolfenstein 3D, but id Software didn't actually do it. They gave it out to 3D Realms. So 3D Realms developed Rise of the Triad separately. So it is a 3D Realms title. And the really cool thing about that was, I don't know if you've ever played it, it's another Nazi killing game, but it's like got multi-layers on it. It's got a lot more kind of development than the original Wolfenstein. I'd say it's getting more closer to kind of Doom with new textures and stuff like that. Well, that game's actually getting remade by a group called Destructive Creations, and they're going to release it on the PS4, PS5 to be confirmed, Switch, PC, and Xbox One. And I think this is going to be really cool for any of those kind of PC first-person shooter fans, but also people that want to get on these older first-person shooters on the Switch. They've got a little trailer of it playing on the Switch at the moment, and it does look really smooth and really good fun.
I was going to say Rise of the Triad for me was always kind of like one of those games which I always just thought, oh yeah, it's a Doom clone kind of thing. But it kind of comes in with, there's that one, Exhumed, and another one called Blood, which are like ones I've always kind of wanted to play.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that it's kind of coming out, because I never played them when I was younger.
I think they were based on different engines. So they were on the Ken Silverman build engine, and then this one was on id Software's Wolfenstein one. But they had that similar look because they used the same textures and stuff.
But if I'm remembering rightly, is Rise of the Triad. It's like Wolfenstein, but it's like even more over the top. Like the Nazis have like even more like,
they're in like big long suits and stuff. But also like they've revealed that this remastered version is going to have multiplayer.
Okay.
Mouse look support, which was really important actually with these older games, because they'd have this fake 3D before, so mouse look support's a really big thing. Widescreen resolution as well, and a classic mode, so you can go back to the older mode as well and play that way.
Sounds awesome.
I like it when they do that in games, but then often you look at it and you play it in old mode for like 2 or 3 seconds and be like, yeah, back to the new one.
Yeah.
through those rose-tinted spectacles. And actually, it's not the only thing getting a remaster as well. Obviously, Doom 64. Now, that was quite an interesting version of Doom that came out on the Nintendo 64, but it was totally unlike any other version, wasn't it? This was like a custom game, really. It felt, I really enjoyed that game. I thought it was a lot darker than the version.
I was literally thinking as you were saying it, you're like, oh, it's like its own version. I was like, yeah, it's the dark version.
Yeah, pretty much. I had to turn the brightness on your monitor all the way up to see what's going on. Well, apparently it's going to be getting a physical release for the PS4 and the Switch.
Yeah, this looks really interesting. I think straight away to point out, so obviously it came out with Doom Eternal as like if you got like the special edition of Doom Eternal, you got it as like a DLC, didn't you?
Yeah.
But now it's coming out as a physical copy. But what I think is really interesting about this is it comes with an N64 cartridge, which isn't playable, sadly, but it comes with an N64 cartridge and it comes in an N64 box, which I think is really awesome.
No, it's cool actually, because we did cover these limited run games before. And we covered the Turrican one, which was blooming expensive. But this is $54.99, which for what you're getting is pretty cool. You're getting the book, the case, all of this kind of stuff, a poster as well.
I do love the fact the price is a lot more reasonable. Do you think they were listening to last week's show?
They could have been.
Right, Joe's not going to slag this one off. We're pricing it reasonably.
Maybe they think they'll sell more. So, like, Turrican was smaller, so higher prices.
Yeah, true, because it doesn't say how many of these they're doing. It just says it's coming out, whereas Turrican was like 3,000, wasn't it?
So what's your betting that someone's going to get that commemorative cart and then shove an actual PCB in there and have
God, 100%.
64 on that?
100%. They'll be like, yeah, we've got Doom running on the Doom 64, fake cartridge.
That'll be on day one, guaranteed. So if you're doing a pre-order that, I'll put a link to it and all the other stories that we talk about in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Speaking of new releases, maybe of a game that I'm almost certain you probably never played. We talked about Polybius on the show before, and I think one of my favourite YouTube videos in the last few years. Do you know that AVGN video he did about Polybius? Yeah. Was that like a Halloween episode or something he did?
It was the week running up to Halloween, and he did like 5 minutes a day. And as he kind of spoke about it, he started out just talking about like the history and the whole kind of like urban legend of Polybius and stuff like that. And then like it kind of turned into like a story, didn't it? Like an actual kind of like he found it like lost footage, and
like
then
a documentary almost, wasn't it?
Mind. And it actually took me like 2 days of watching it to realize what was going on. Do you know what I mean? Like to realize, oh, okay, it's a story kind of thing.
Well, Polybius, obviously, it's one of probably the biggest urban legend in the world of video games. I mean, I'm sure pretty much everyone knows it, but it was meant to be this arcade cabinet that appeared mysteriously in a couple of arcades back in the early 80s. And there's been all these like stories about how it was actually a plant there by the US government to there's even been reports that apparently it was to recruit potential soldiers, and other stories saying it caused sieges and brain aneurysms in teenagers who were playing it. Some people thought the CIA were using it to brainwash people, and then all the cabinets disappeared, and that was a rumor that was pretty much been around since I've been on the internet. And Jeff Minter obviously did a game called Polybius, kind of based on the legend. That is actually one of my favourite games on the PSVR. But now this is Numbskull Designs, who've been doing these really cool mini arcade cabinets. I've got the Miss Pac-Man and the Pac-Man one. They did the Galaga one recently as well. And these are really nice cabinets that they do. But now they're going to be bringing their own version of Polybius to their quarter arcade range. So that means if you've ever wanted to own your own little mini Polybius cabinet, you can finally do it.
But what game does it have on it then? Is it an actual title or
actual Polybius on it?
Yeah.
You doesn't
actually remember it after you played it.
It just disappears after one go.
You just buy it and you go to play it, and some like Men in Black just come and take it away.
Play the game again, boys. Well, this is running on Kickstarter at the moment. I mean, they're already, at the time recording this, is 9 days to go, and they're nearly at 40,000 out of the £50,000 goal. So, they're definitely going to get there.
This looks quite nice, actually. I think there's one feature that looks really cool. On the back, it's got a huge USB hub. You know how useful that can be. You can open the back of the little cart and just shove all your USB devices in there and have
like 10 of them.
Yeah, charging off the Polybius unit. That's quite smart.
Imagine that your friend comes over. Can I charge my phone? Oh yeah, just plug it into the back of my Polybius cabinet.
I mean, I'm just looking now, so 9 days left on it. I mean, it's only £79 for the early bird, which is pretty cool, or it's £99 once it's over. But I can't find anywhere what actual game is going to be on it or anything.
Yeah, I
about
mean,
that.
looking at it, I mean, they're saying that they're going to kind of do their what they imagine Polybius would have been like, I imagine. So it's going to be something I'm guessing the making for this. It's not going to be obviously the original game, I wouldn't imagine.
But I'm guessing the hardware in there is going to be something that you could just probably chuck ROMs on, or some kind of one of these arcade.
Well, the other ones, I mean, I've got the Pac-Man and the Miss Pac-Man one. They're kind of locked down, so you can't actually put your own stuff on there. They're just dedicated to that one game. But it's commodity hardware that's in there. So I mean, you could probably find a way. But I just think it's more. It's a talking point in your retro collection, isn't it? Having even a mini Polybius cabinet.
Yeah,
so,
it does look nice, and it's an oddity, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to back that on Kickstarter, it's live now, and you've still got a week left. And like I said, these cabinets they've made, I mean, they're all really good quality as well. Now, before we get into our chat this week with Brian Baglow, you were quite excited about this as well, Joe. Scott Pilgrim. Now, that was a game based on the movie that wasn't around for very long.
Yeah, so this is so Scott Pilgrim vs. the World was a graphic novel which then got made into a film, and at the same time the game came out, which was based on the novel, but it came out when the film came out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And essentially it was only on, I don't know how long it was on like PSN and Xbox Live for, but it was an Xbox Live arcade game. It was only on there, I want to say, for like a year in 2010. So it's quite new for us for the Retro Hour, about as new as we've probably ever gone. But I loved the game. It's an 8-bit style beat 'em up, and it has an absolute fantastic, like, the graphics on it are amazing. The soundtrack is absolutely beautiful. It's a hard as nails couch play game, so there's like it's 4-player co-op, and it just, I don't know the story behind it, but I want to say there was something with the licensing on the music, and it got taken down after like a year or two. And it was one of those games that used to appear on eBay, like, an Xbox 360 for sale, because it had Scott Pilgrim vs. the World on it. So I still have it, which is really cool. So I still have it on my 360, and I play it every now and then. But it is coming out again. It just says this holiday season, so it's coming out in time for Christmas on PS4, Xbox One, Switch. It's also coming out on Stadia and Steam and stuff like that. And it's just going to be a new updated version with the original soundtrack, all the original graphics and everything like that. So, and it's going to be 4-player local co-op, which is not something you get very often on these modern games and stuff. And it's going to be completely 4-player online as well. So I'm super excited about this because I can't stress enough how much of a good beat 'em up it was.
And it does look very retro inspired. I mean, if you're a fan of what we normally talk about, I mean, like you said, it's a 2010 game, but it looks like it could have come out in 1992 or something.
Yeah, 100%. And the graphics, like, it sounds really weird when I say this, but even though they were retro style graphics, they were ahead of their time because they look like those hand drawn pixel perfect graphics that we see so much on like Switch re-releases these days. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you were seeing it in 2010 and stuff like that. I believe it comes with all the DLC as well, which was just a couple of characters. And just when you play it, I'm hoping it comes out just at like £10-15. So a lot of people do play it and stuff like that. But it's just awesome seeing all the just the little Easter eggs in the background. Some are really, really obvious. Like the world map is just Super Mario World 3. Like literally, it's just a complete rip off of it. But you even see little things like Polybius arcades in the background and stuff like that.
Right.
So just a really, really cool retro game, which I'm just excited to see is actually going to be finally coming back after like 10 years.
You know what really bugs me about digital gaming? It is that, the fact that you can buy something, then if it gets removed from the store, there's no way to get it again. I mean, unless it's on like, your hard disk or, I mean, sometimes you can re-download it, but there have been occasions when even they get deleted. And I've got the Outrun Online arcade on my Xbox 360, and like my friend sold his 360 and then wanted to get another one, but he couldn't download it again for some reason.
Yeah.
It obviously got deleted, I think, because the license ran out. But that's one thing, at least when you've got a physical copy of a game, it's never going to get removed and you've always got it. I think that's definitely the downside to digital gaming.
Oh, yeah. Like at the moment, I mod Wii U's, and Brain Training is the game that we use. But as soon as the Wii U store's gone, there's going to be no opportunity to mod them anymore because that digital copy gets taken down and then that's it.
So, Joe, if you want to get your Xbox 360 with that on eBay for like 300 quid, and do it before.
I'll probably get about 30 quid for it.
Right, then we're going to chat to Brian Baglow in just a minute. Before we do, let's just take a moment to give a huge thank you to this week's supporter. And you know, on this show, we only pick sponsors that we really believe in and products that we really like as well. And you guys know that I'm a total coffee fiend.
Complete coffee fiend, man. Like every time I'm like, Dan, tea? No, coffee.
I'm not even joking. If I have 8 cups of coffee in a day, that's normally a quiet day for me. But this week, we're brought to you by our incredible friends at Packed Coffee. Now, Packed Coffee, they do freshly roasted specialty coffee, and they don't sacrifice quality for the sake of profit. And it's ground just moments before it's shipped. And also it's direct trade as well, because I was reading this, it's quite interesting actually, and quite sad, that most farmers actually lose money with each sale at commodity prices with, the coffee that you buy in the supermarket. But they actually buy direct from the farmer, meaning they earn 25 to 125% above fair trade rates. So they actually make a profit.
Because a lot of coffee comes from places like Ethiopia, Rwanda, El Salvador, Brazil, and Kenya, and it's good to be supporting these guys.
And there's also massive variety as well. They've got over 15 different roasting coffees at any time that you can choose from. And it's really flexible as well. I mean, they deliver it to your door, but you can choose how you want it and when it's delivered. So, most subscriptions, you either get it like on the 1st of every month or like every Wednesday. With this, you can pick, get your coffee whenever you want it, essentially. So if, like me, you're plowing through a lot of coffee a week, you can have multiple deliveries. And, of course, you can pause or cancel or change your plan at any time. And they actually deliver it fast and free. If you order it before 1 p.m, Monday to Friday, it'll be with you the next day. And it's letterbox friendly as well. So that means you don't have to wait around for it at home. It comes through the door and it's there when you get in. Now, one thing I love about it as well is, like I said, I do love coffee, but also there's just something about having a quality coffee. When you open the bag and you just get that smell and you can tell that it's going to be delicious.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, I just love going into coffee shops. Even though I'm a tea drinker, I just sit there and kind of have that atmosphere and that nice fresh roasted coffee smell.
So you can take it from me as a coffee connoisseur. Honestly, it's one of the nicest cups of coffee I've ever tasted. And we want you to give it a try for yourself. So we've got a discount code that I've managed to get for you to get your first bag for just £1.95. So all you have to do, and obviously we get these deals so you can take advantage of them and you'll be helping out the podcast. This keeps us going, this kind of thing. So please do support our sponsors. All you have to do is go to packedcoffee.com. That's PACT coffee.com, and then create your own flexible coffee plan, enter the code RETRO at checkout, and you'll get a specialty coffee box through your door for just £1.95. So have a look right now, thanks to our very good friends at Pack Coffee. And also we've got a Patreon running at the moment as well that we've been using to, I've been over your house about, 3 times this week? Your new gear. We're nearly
socially
ready to
distancing,
go
of course.
Of course. We're almost ready to go with the new stuff. Joe is going to be building a desk this weekend. I know you're very excited about that.
In the post. I love that. I've got a desk through the letterbox.
We'll have to live stream that, Joe's attempt at building a desk.
Oh, God, please don't. I get so frustrated with these flat pack furnitures. But yes, I have got my first piece of equipment, which is a desk.
But I will say, your missus is actually a bit of a whiz at doing the flat pack furniture stuff. Because I know when we moved house, my wife got your missus over to do all the IKEA stuff. And I think she
enjoys it. She usually kicks me out of the room when we try to do it together. For her to just do it, and I'll come in and I'll just be like, oh, she's built a wardrobe. Bearing in mind, my missus is like a tiny little 5'3". She just goes for it with like a hammer and chisel or something. So yeah,
if you got a chisel, then you're not doing it right.
Chiseling some IKEA desks.
This is how experienced I am.
Maybe leave it to her this weekend.
I'm going to be trying to do it with the desk this weekend, so hopefully I don't break it.
Yeah, we'll get a second one on order. But listen, guys, it's thanks to you that we're investing in new equipment, getting our home studio set up so the show's more comfortable for us to do and sounds better as well. So we really appreciate your support. And of course, we've got another Patrons Hangout coming up as well, which we're going to be doing next Sunday evening, 27th of September at 8 p.m. If you want to join us for that, I'll of course put a link to that in the Patron page. It's always a bit of a laugh as well, isn't it? Just hanging out with the lads and geeking out about technology and anything else that comes to mind. And you can join us for that. We've got a few other perks as well. But really, the main thing is you're keeping the podcast going week in, week out. And of course, for making a donation into our Patreon, you will get a mention in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Like this week, thank you to Steve Arnott,
Alex Sulman,
Charlie Preston,
Nat Robbins,
and Weeju Woo.
who all made donations into our Patreon. And if you'd like to do the same, you can find that right now at theretrohour.com. Right, let's get some inside stories about DMA Designs, Rockstar, those original incredible GTA games. Our special guest is Brian Baglow, next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on this week's very special guest. Now, today we're going to be talking about a few legendary companies, and they're also one of the most infamous video games franchises of all time. DMA Design, Rockstar, Grand Theft Auto, much more as well, with our special guest. Welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, Brian Baglow.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you joining us. Now, before we get into, your tales of the time you spent working on those games and at those companies, and also what you're doing these days, because I know you're doing some really important work in Scotland right now. I mean, it's always nice to kind of get a bit of a background on our guests and kind of find out your geek credentials. So what was kind of your earliest gaming experience then? What introduced you to this crazy world of video games?
ZX81. I somehow persuaded my parents that it was the future. Honestly, if you don't buy me this, I'm going to end up, dying alone in a bus shelter covered in pigeon poo and being arrested by the police. Because technology, Mum, honestly, it's the thing. So they bought me a ZX81 plus a 16K RAM pack, and I spent weeks and weeks trying to get anything to load on the bloody thing. Until I got a new tape recorder, and it turned out that the actual output cable, the output jack, wasn't working. So I think my first game was a very, very early prototype text adventure called Phoenix. And that was about it. And then I discovered that those games all sucked, so I persuaded my mum and dad to buy an Atari VCS instead. And that was me away. Pitfall all the way. That was my Tomb Raider.
Although, I mean, obviously we had 3D Monster Maze on the ZX81. That was a scary game when it was around originally.
Oh yeah, it's unfortunately, I think mine got so hot when I tried to load that, it melted through my desk and is probably still on its way to the Earth's core.
Well, what was the gaming scene like growing up in Scotland?
The gaming scene was pretty much like the rest of the UK. The home computer revolution hit, and that was really the first thing that many of us knew about it. I was lucky. I grew up in Fife, as you can tell from the charming accent, which was an old seaside resort, or Leven, the town I grew up in, was an old seaside resort. So they had a couple of arcades there, and so they started off with the Space Invaders and the Asteroids and the Centipedes and the like. So I guess my first experience of kind of commercially produced games that the rest of the world was playing came from there. And I remember distinctly asking to go there, and my mum's look of horror and disgust that she would have to go in with my little brother in the pram and stand there while I thrashed about in Spy Hunter, or I remember being terrified when Gorf spoke to me for the first time, because I wasn't expecting that. And then, as I say, the ZX81, the Atari 2600, I was a big 2600 fan, and that really opened the doors to the gifting phenomenon. I could then go and bug my grandparents and the rest of my family for games when it came to birthdays and Christmas times. So, from the original Combat, which I had to eke out over 6 months, I really got into Bombjack, and then, as I say, Pitfall. I did eventually finish Pitfall, all 20 minutes of it, but I think it took me close on a year and a half.
Was there much of a kind of copying or piracy scene?
Yeah, when I was at high school, I had the ZX81. A lot of the cooler kids had the Spectrum when that came out, and it's, let's be honest, it's if you're blowing an entire month's pocket money on a game, and it was John Menzies in the High Street in Dunfermline, where you could go in at lunchtime and pore over all of the cassette tape boxes and figure out what it was you were going to buy when you had enough money. So yes, copying was rife, to be absolutely honest with you. And then moving on a few years, when we got into the the Amiga and the ST years, the whole demo scene and the copying on disc-based media was really kind of what pushed gaming, quite so far and quite so fast, because you found a game that you liked, you let your friends know about it, and you would, okay, yeah, I can lend you a copy, wink, wink. So yeah, it did happen. I won't deny it. If the police want to come round for copyright infringement, just stick my postcode and address in at the end of this podcast, and I'll cheerfully confess to killing the games industry.
I do think, though, it's one thing that it did keep alive back then, the demo scene, was definitely Jiffy bags. I think that kept that industry afloat for a good few years.
Oh, absolutely. And the whole the market scene, up in Glasgow we had Paddy's Market, and we had Kinross Market, which, they were indoor at the weekends, and you would have the trestle tables and the guys with the big boxes of games. But if you just went up and did the secret hand sign and gave them a wink, it's like, you could have a look in the back of the car or the back of the van, and that's where all the plain blue discs with the handwritten labels lived. So it did a lot for the emerging games market, I think, because there were more and more people out there who were getting access to games that they would never otherwise have been able to do.
Yeah, and I imagine it sold a lot of hardware as well.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's arguably the whole of the Scottish gaming scene came out of the fact that the Timex factory in Dundee was the primary manufacturing plant for the ZX Spectrum. So, it's a proud legacy and all that. And there has been, through numerous discussions with some of the guys who were around and about at that point. There were a few QA issues with units which fell off the back of an assembly line and that kind of thing. So, yeah, we're not saying that the entire sector is founded on piracy and theft, but yeah, what the hell.
Well, you went to university to study software engineering. What made you want to consider computing as a career path then?
That's a really good question. This is a true story, right? When I was at high school, I was in the first year that actually got to study computers. Right? It wasn't computer science; it was just computers. And we went into this room that was surrounded by desks, and each desk had a ZX81, and the woodworking teacher had thoughtfully made frames, and the frames had been put on the desk and the computer had been put inside, and they'd been screwed down so that people couldn't steal them. And the teacher, who I believe was our French teacher, because I don't think computing teachers existed at the time, couldn't get the computers to work. And he was like, okay, has anyone got one of these bloody things? And I put my hand up nervously, and he said, okay, can you come and tell me why these aren't working? And the woodworking teacher had neglected to leave a space for the power cable. So none of them were plugged in, which I think tells you an awful lot about the very early days. But that kind of sparked my interest. And from school, I actually joined a big technology company, a company called Marconi, who were a major employer back in Fife in those days. And it was all military, and it was all Department of or MOD, Ministry of Defence, and so on and so forth. And they did everything from torpedoes through to nuclear power station control room simulators and educational software for navies and stuff. And so I applied, and I got a job there through the YTS scheme, because I am that old, child of the 80s. You can say lots of things about Mrs. Thatcher, but she got me my first job, which paid £25.70 per week.
Well, you were also programming at Marconi, weren't you? So
I was.
There was stuff like COBOL was around, and all these different languages. Yeah,
COBOL and Pascal were the big things. I loved Pascal. I actually I used it to program a turtle so I could draw Sierpinski gaskets because fractals had just been discovered, and they were quite a big thing. So I was playing with it, but Marconi sent me to college and then university one day a week to go and learn computing and then computer science, or computer engineering, I do beg your pardon. And but it was all, the way it was taught, it was all about controlling machines. It was CNC, it was lathes and drills and flexible manufacturing systems and all of this kind of thing. And when I suggested to one of my lecturers that I wanted to do a project on computer games, he told me he'd fail me on the spot. So it wasn't necessarily, and this is despite the fact that the company was doing some fairly major chunky simulators. They did the simulator for the Challenger 2 tank and things like that. But games were not to be contemplated. That was a frivolous waste of time. Again, you would die lonely and alone in a bus shelter in the pouring rain, surrounded by the cast of EastEnders if you ever went and did video games. It would just be awful. So games were never really on the agenda. My passion for games at home was not reflected either at work or in my academic career. And that's putting that very, very, very kindly.
Well, obviously, you did go to work at the legendary DMA Design. How did you get your job there? And were you aware of the company's history?
I was. Strangely enough, it was my mum showed me a job advert in the local paper, the Courier, and it was DMA Design looking for programmers. And I was at Marconi at the time. I had done my ONC and HNC. I was doing my HND, and she went, "You quite like this games thing. Look, did you know these guys existed?" And I looked and went, "Oh, okay." And it was only when I mentioned it to somebody else at Marconi, they went, "The guys who did Lemmings," and I was like, "What? Lemmings?" Because I was part of a computer club at Marconi, so every month we would all chip in a fiver or whatever, and we took it in turns to buy a game at the end of the month, and we would all get together at lunchtimes and play the games. And so Lemmings had been a huge, a smash hit for us, and I didn't realise it was the same company, so I immediately applied, and applied as a programmer, and I got an interview, and I went up to Dundee, in my shiny suit and my, turned up sleeves, because again it was the 80s and I was Don Johnson, and I got turned down flat, totally flat, and I can pinpoint it to the exact second. It was where Adam, who was the head of the tools department, said, "So how much 3D programming have you done?" And I said, "None." And he went, "Anyway, it's been lovely. Thank you for coming in." And so I didn't get the job. But in the meantime, one of my friends at Marconi, Grant Middleton, who joined the audio team at DMA, was sending me emails going, "It's so good here. Look, this is what we get to do, and this is my job. Can you believe this is my job?" And I just hated him. I hated him so much. I just wanted to go and set fire to his car. I didn't. But so what happened was about, I think it was 6 or 8 months later, the company was advertising again. They were looking for programmers. And I decided not to apply as a programmer. I sent them a CV which was about half an inch, 3/4 of an inch thick. And it was the most outrageous tissue of lies ever. But obviously so. I claimed that I had discovered the Northeast Passage, that I had, performed all of the bass parts on everything that Muddy Waters had ever recorded, that I had written the X-Files, I had discovered 3 of the noble gases. I just made stuff up, but outrageously so. And I attached, as I recall, a pack of Return of the Jedi transfers marked as a bribe, and just really kind of went over the top. And I sent this whole package into them, and I got asked to go for an interview. And so I arrived not really knowing quite what the hell to expect. So I went up to their offices in Dundee. It was Dave Jones, who founded the studio, and Stuart Graham, who was the head of it's not the R&D department, it was the design department, who interviewed me, and they asked me a whole bunch of questions about what I had played and why I liked it and why games worked and what didn't work about games. And I answered as best I could, and I got offered the position of writer. So I joined the design team as a writer, and the first thing they gave me to do was this obscure little top-down game where you played a cop zooming around the city trying to, arrest and clean up the town, arrest the bad guys. And I was in, and it was quite good fun, really.
Yeah, so obviously we're going to get on to, the Scottish gaming scene very soon, and into Grand Theft Auto. But you did mention Lemmings there, and obviously I know today there's a Lemmings statue in Dundee. I mean, do you think that Lemmings really put the Scottish gaming scene on the map when that game came out?
Oh, it absolutely did. There's no question about it. It was one of the first sort of international breakout hits. It was one of those games that came out and did really well, and then got ported and did really well, and then the porting just kept going and going. I think at my last count, when I was still at DMA Design, it had reached around about 22 or 23 platforms, and that's expanded since then, because Sony now have the IP and they've brought it to mobile. and tablet and the like. But I still think it holds some kind of record for the sheer number of ports, because it was going to absolutely everything. The Sam Coupe, the FM Towns, it's like the C64, the VIC-20, everything was getting a port of Lemmings. I think they even had a request at one point to take it to the Game & Watch, but I think that was a step too far. I'm not entirely sure how that would have worked. But yeah.
Well, I got it running on the Commodore 64, I remember, and that was pretty decent.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. It's so simplistic, it's so stripped back, but so satisfying and so much fun that it worked on pretty much every device that you could throw it at. And I think that's really what established DMA, because they had done a few original titles, Menace and Blood Money, and they had done quite a lot of porting work for Psygnosis on Shadow of the Beast and so on and so forth. But Lemmings was the one that really kind of gave them that reputation. It gave them that recognition on a global stage where they could start to go out and start building their own original IP again and start pitching their own ideas to companies around the world. I think it was Howard Lincoln from Nintendo of America who referred to Dave Jones as the Steven Spielberg of the games industry, which, within the company itself, it quickly became the Steven Seagal of the games industry because of his kick-ass, no-nonsense approach. That's not actually true, but we did quite enjoy the description. But Lemmings arguably did more than anything else to really establish Scotland's reputation on the global stage.
Well, it was really interesting that you actually mentioned there that they were asking about 3D stuff, because at the time there was a huge pressure for all of these kind of old Amiga companies or kind of 16-bit companies to go 3D and to enter this new kind of 32-bit era. Did you kind of feel there was an air of that pressure around DMA designs?
Yes, there absolutely was, because you're right. The one thing that's constant in the games industry is change, and the onward evolution of technology, and the fact that we went from 8 to 16 to 32 to 64, yada, 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 the whole progression of the console era really did pressure companies into looking at the cutting edge. And DMA came in for that a fair old bit. When I joined, they were working on Grand Theft Auto, Body Harvest, Silicon Valley, Tactics, and I think that was it. And the only one that wasn't true 3D, and you can't see my ironically wiggling bunny ears, to put that in quotes, was Grand Theft Auto. Tactics was 3D, Body Harvest, Silicon Valley were all 3D, but there was immense pressure to be on that cutting edge, and so yes, they were getting asked, all the way through the development of GTA. It was, is this going to cut it alongside all of these cool games that have come out? I remember being part of the team the day that Tomb Raider was released, and a few of us went out at lunchtime, picked up copies, went back to the office, installed it, and then just sat there going, oh my god, this is gorgeous, we're dead. Because how are we going to compete with that? These huge, expansive environments, and these huge, impressive spaces. I mean, the level design, the movement, everything was wonderful, and it was terrifying. And, it really did bring home to us the difference between the approach to the way that Core Design had done Tomb Raider and the way that we were approaching GTA. So, it was a constant kind of underlying pressure just to keep pushing things, keep making things better, keep making things more advanced. Not because it would necessarily improve the game, but because you could use that as a marketing tag, and you could get it onto a different machine.
And because they use that kind of pseudo 3D above view engine that was from Clockwork Knight as well.
Indeed.
It still, you're right, it still did feel a bit kind of like dated at the time, the graphics. And I think, all these extra stuff like the storylines, designing level and the art and the interactivity added to it. But you guys must have been scared initially. I remember seeing it on the news and thinking, oh, an Amiga title's coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, the game was in production when I joined, but it was still race and chase, and it was still, you played the role of the cop and you were trying to clean up the town. But everything that was going on in the background, and the fact that it was a living, breathing city, there was a huge amount of processing time that was taken up in that. And let's be absolutely honest, even if we had gone, polygonal, and we had turned it into, a polygon version of the game, you still wouldn't have been able to run it on anything bar, the most advanced systems at the time. And that wasn't really where we were going. We wanted everyone to be able to play it. So the base level of the game had to work across the PC, the PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and so on and so forth. So, you couldn't start creating different games for different platforms. Otherwise, you might as well have stopped, drawn a line under it, and started again with a completely different technology. And this was one of the issues, again, ongoing throughout, was the fact that this is starting to look a little bit dated, which is why quite far through the development process, we kind of stopped and ripped out the cars and put in 24-bit versions of the cars, which caused another few months of delay. But it was just to try and make it look as good as we could, while keeping all of the underlying, I can't even come close to calling it AI, all of the stuff that kept the city happening around you. So it did cause a few problems.
Well, I'm quite interested to find out a bit more about kind of the earliest days of Grand Theft Auto. You mentioned it was race and chase initially. Were there any kind of other concepts that kind of fell by the wayside as development went on?
Well, I joined when the game was already in development, so I wasn't there for the very early days. But as you know, Mike created the engine, and I think the design team at DMA had kind of, under Dave's general, benevolent guidance, decided that, you could drive around a city with this kind of thing. It's not that Dave's solution to everything was throw expensive cars at it, but it totally was. And so, the idea of playing the cop, clean up the city, it's a classic story. Why would it not work? And it was just really when it got to the initial playtest and you were zooming around the city. But if you're a cop, even if you're the bad guy who gets the book thrown at him all the time, you can't skid through a park knocking, pensioners and baby walkers and everything out the way without getting some sort of penalty. So if you drove for fun, you would end up getting penalised. And there was a constant battle with that as well, because all of a sudden you ended up driving like a driving instructor if you wanted to get, progress through the game. And that really conflicted with the sort of the all-out city reacting around you. And I guess it was a narrative problem, and it was kind of a narrative solution that was come up with to address that. But way back in the sort of the beginning, it really was focused on the classic goodies and baddies, cops and robbers type of thing. And once you've been immersed in that for a while, it's really hard to take that step back, which I think is why it took quite so long. We're talking maybe a year or so, maybe a year or more into development before the decision was taken to actually swap it round and try playing as the bad guy instead. And that really did make all the difference.
So GTA these days is really important, the storyline, but I guess back then it was a really loose kind of concept. How did you go around making a storyline and designing levels with exciting missions?
Well, now there you come to the most fun part of my job at DMA Design. So I was introduced to the team. This is Brian, he's your writer. This is Paul, this is Steve, this is Billy, these are your level designers. It's like, this is the rest of the team. Hi guys, hi Brian. And so the way it worked was I had to sit down with various team members and try and get my head around this game, because this is way before the term sandbox was ever thought of. And so you can go anywhere, yeah, and you can pick up missions in any order, yeah, or not, and just zoom around and have fun, yeah, okay. And you guys have written missions already, yeah, okay. What is it that you want me to do? Well, you need to put words in. I'm like, okay, excellent. Totally makes sense. So the way it worked was that Paul and Stephen Billy, the level designers who worked on the game, had built the entire city. They had, from not even ground level, below ground level, water level, street level, all the way up. Every tile had been placed, all the streets, all the buildings, everything. And then within that, they had started to give you things to do. So you would walk over a particular telephone and it would tell you to go to one area of the city, get in a car, drive to this building, drive into the building, you'd come out in a different car, get on a motorbike, shoot a guy in the face, then drive here, all of the things that you would do. That existed. And then my job was to sort of go, okay, why are you doing this? So I had to then retrofit some plot to this. Now, adding on to that was the fact that there were no voiceovers, there were no cutscenes, there was nothing that I could do. The only way we had of conveying information was a pager, because that's how old this was, ladies and gentlemen. No mobile phones. You had a pager which had 120 characters. So Twitter, I was there years ago, mate. So I had 120 characters to try and convey what it was you had to do and create characters and create some sort of narrative arc. And that was no easy task, because I had to invent characters on the fly that you would never see. I had to give you reasons for doing things that you wouldn't otherwise have done, or things that the level designers had decided that were going to be good fun as part of this sequence of activities, and then try and string them all together. And then also be aware of the fact, be aware at the same time that you could pick this mission up at any point within that city. And while there was an increased probability that you would pick up missions that were kind of clustered together, or the end point for one mission increased the probability that you would pick up a start point of another mission nearby, none of that was guaranteed. So there was an awful lot of going back and forward and figuring out exactly who the gang members should be, who the bosses were, who the names should be. A lot of that got thrown out simply because they wouldn't fit in 120 characters. So quite short names tended to be quite popular. But the way I approached it was, rather than try to create an overall flow and an overall story, I went out and stole as much as I could from all of the classic crime movies, all of the capers, all of the sort of the escape, the getaway drivers. Every crime movie I could steal, every crime book, comic, very few of the games that had been done up to that point. And then I just referenced them throughout and tried to make sure that people would kind of realise within the course of doing a single mission that what you're doing is essentially the diamond heist from Reservoir Dogs, or you're doing the mission that Mel Gibson did at the final 10 minutes of Point Blank, and all of these kind of things. So it was just trying to create recognisable moments within this madness of a city, and trying to tie together little recognisable themes that worked in different contexts. So there were repeating characters that you would find throughout each city, but you would only recognise them after having done 2 or 3 missions. So in Liberty City, for example, it was the mayor's daughter. The mayor's daughter kept coming in for some absolute aggro, the poor girl. So that at one point you blew up a limo and the mayor's daughter was in the back. At the other, I think you hijacked an ambulance and the mayor's daughter was in the back, and it kind of worked. And it could be her coming back from the hospital, or it could be her going home, and then her dad takes her out in the limousine, and so it really worked in a lot of different ways. But it was a real introduction to the whole non-linear narrative design side of things, and I think we got a fairly strong kind of sense of what the game was about. In addition to all the mission stuff, there were a lot of triggers. So you drove over a certain tile in the city, and you could just trigger a little pager message. And again, I just raided popular culture as much as I possibly could. So we had a little hat tip to core design and Tomb Raider. So you drove over one particular tile, and you got a message going, "You were fantastic last night. Call me, Lara." just little things to try and provoke a reaction, to make people believe that there was a background to this character, that things were happening, that all of the activities you were undertaking were within the context of this bigger storyline. But it was all by implication. Nothing really happened. We just told you about things and made you imagine that things were happening, when your back was turned or when you weren't paying attention.
And that idea is still kind of used in the GTA series. So you look at something like Vice City, and that's very much kind of based on a film. Also San Andreas and stuff like Liberty City, the actual name of the city, and the idea is now used in later games. Where did the name Liberty City come from?
I think the level designers came up with them. They were each given a particular city, a particular level to create, and I think the idea was that we wanted to pay homage to American culture. None of us had. I don't think anybody had really been to America before. We started working on the game, or if they had, it had only been for a quick holiday. But we were all absolutely influenced by the movies, but at the same time we didn't want to get sued, so we couldn't call it New York, because people would have been telling us that the mapping wasn't particularly accurate, and which, given it was based on quite large squares, was going to be true. But also we had no idea, being a small company in Dundee, if we could get sued by cities. So rather than New York, San Francisco, and Miami, it was Liberty City, San Andreas, and Vice City. And obviously Vice City was a homage to Miami Vice, and San Francisco, the San Andreas Fault, and New York, Liberty City. So I think it was a combination of the level designers and the rest of the team all having input, and just deciding that we would abstract America out. So it was all recognisably these locations, but it was differentiated enough so that we might not get sued. And that was kind of I think that was the sum total of the research that went into the whole, we should probably not use real world names just in case. So let's go for, Liberty City, and let's call that car a Jugular.
Well, there were many memorable things about those early Grand Theft Auto games. I mean, how did stuff like, Garanga and Kill Frenzy and stuff like that get added, and were you aware of how important they would be at the time?
Yeah, I think a lot of these, again, came down to being creative within the incredibly tight restrictions that we had within the game. So one of the programmers came up with a little routine that allowed the pedestrians to follow each other. So, they had always walked down the sidewalks, turned corners, and acted kind of believably. But one of the programmers decided, let's see if we can do a little algorithm that will make them follow each other. And lo and behold, they did. And it was like, okay, so what can we do? Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I think it was my idea, because I grew up in a small town in Fife called Dunfermline, and at lunchtime, when we went down the high street from high school, very occasionally you would get this line of Hare Krishnas leaping down the street, and you would hear the drums, and it would be Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. And it was just so unexpected in this kind of post-industrial town in the middle of, nowhere, in Scotland, and the saffron robes and everything. And I thought, well, that would be quite fun, because there's an audio sound associated with that. And if there's a benefit to running them over, if you actually got a score, then it would be quite funny. And this was after we had decided you were going to be the bad guy, and as you ran pedestrians over, it was Gary Penn, I believe, who sort of suggested it should be like pinball. So, 10, 20, 30, 40. And so that, combined with the fact that we could now have a little line of pedestrians, meant that we could do something fun. So I'm sure I suggested it. I am perfectly prepared to be told that I am wrong. It was 27 years ago, so, which really makes me feel old, guys. Please be gentle. But, that was a really just interesting way of using a particular little algorithm, so that whenever you heard that little dung, 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 you're like, oh, Krishnas. and your head would go up, and you're like, okay, where are they? Where are they? Where are they? And I, following the same logic as we used for naming the cities and the cars, my reasoning was it was really hard to get sued by an ideology like Hare Krishna. I didn't think they were particularly litigious, so it seemed like a fairly safe bet, and it was a bit of an experiment. I mean, let's be honest, everything in the original Grand Theft Auto was a bit of an experiment, but it made us laugh, and that was kind of enough. And then as for the kill frenzies, once Gary had suggested the whole pinball scoring thing, we really pushed that because it was fun, and it kind of fitted in with the whole fact that the city was recognizing your activities and then rewarding them. So all the little kill frenzy bonuses where you got the remote control cars and the like. It was just, could you rack up a huge body count in a very short space of time? With the corollary of really ramping up your wanted level. And it was like, yeah, that sounds like really good fun. Because when you look at the game, you look at the toys that you've got within this digital playset. What you can do with them is fairly limited. So again, it's all about recontextualizing things, and it's all about making you believe that you're doing something other than you were doing. You could do a kill frenzy just by, getting out the car and mowing down pedestrians, or zooming down the pavement at 100 miles an hour. But having the little additional missions and having something that really differentiated it and made it stand out and encouraged people to kind of let loose, really, I guess, played with people's expectations and made them think that there was an awful lot more going on, that this was just some crazy city with all of these huge hidden secrets. And it was really, in a lot of cases, to kind of fill up some gaps in the map or give you some relief from the mission structure, where it was go here, get in that car, get in this car, go there, get in this car, drive into this building. And it could be a little repetitive. So it really broke things up. And it was all about playing into the whole sort of pinball mentality, but playing pinball with people.
Well, the soundtrack was a huge thing. And I even remember the rap now. Grand Theft Auto, gotta make a move if you want to. That's really bad. But,
very well done.
Yeah. It was a really good soundtrack. And I guess that must have taken up, number one, a huge amount of space on the CD. It must have really pleased Sony BMG, being a kind of music company, and it must have kept you guys engaged, because I know you actually wrote one of the tunes, the country and western.
Well,
tune.
I did. To be absolutely accurate, if you ever heard me attempting to play a musical instrument, you'd know that's not the case. But I did write the lyrics for both the country and western and the heavy metal track 4 Letter Love. Being the writer, that I can totally do. But the soundtrack is a thing of beauty, and I think the soundtrack for the original Grand Theft Auto should be enshrined in a museum somewhere as something that was profoundly game-changing. And I use game-changing in every sense of the word. So the whole soundtrack was done in-house. Right? The whole of Grand Theft Auto, you have to kind of understand, was a bit of a risk. Okay, and while it was BMG Interactive, the interactive side of the company was not as tied into the music side as you might expect. And Grand Theft Auto was seen as a bit of the run to the litter. They did an awful lot of different games back in their original portfolio. I mean, they had a really, really broad variety. It really kind of smacked of a big music company going, we need a games division. Everyone else has got one, we want one. And then going out and signing a whole stack of stuff and then figuring out what to do with all of it from then. But GTA was not in 3D. For the first several years of its development, it wasn't that much fun. It didn't really hang together. The bits that you would expect to be cool, like driving a car and running around the city and, just maneuvering through the environment, weren't particularly good. And it's, this isn't just me saying this. I think pretty much the whole team will admit to it. So we didn't have a budget for a soundtrack. We didn't have any licensed music. We didn't have any opportunity to approach BMG artists or Arista or any of their other labels and say, we would love to use some of your music. The most we ever got was a goodie box from BMG one Christmas with a whole stack of freebies and goodies and merchandise and CDs and everything in it, which was lovely and appreciated, and we loved them to bits. But there was no way we were getting additional money to go and make a soundtrack. So everything on the soundtrack was done within DMA Design's audio department, and those guys are geniuses and should get way more recognition than they did. So they actually started off with the actual sounds, the sound effects within the city, and they went and sat in the Kingsway, which is the big ring road around Dundee, and listened to cars and figured out what it is that you actually hear when you hear a car going past. And they figured out you actually heard the tyres first before you heard the engine, and then all of this kind of thing. So they actually approached it very logically. And I believe it was Colin Anderson, who was the head of the audio department, who suggested, radio stations. You get in a car, it's a different radio station. Different types of car, different radio stations. And that way you've got variety, but also if you get in different types of car, if you're listening to something that you've heard before, it's because they're listening to the same radio station. And then you can do little cuts and interludes and DJs and all of that kind of thing. Genius.
Well, speaking of other genius things about Grand Theft Auto, the marketing in particular was incredible. How did you go about this? And was it kind of risky to whip up the controversy at the time? So, obviously that was after stuff like, Mortal Kombat and Night Trap introduced age ratings. But I remember Grand Theft Auto really taking that to the next level in its marketing.
That was not DMA. That was all BMG. They had looked at the game. We got the game to the point where it was finally finished. We had kind of wrestled it into a box onto a Gold Master, and they were happy. And again, they kind of cut corners with a lot of the marketing. They originally the maps that you got in the game were going to have a lot of adverts around the outside and that kind of thing. So when they said we're going to bring in Max Clifford Associates, I think the general reaction around the whole of DMA was who? But I was thrilled and delighted, because over the course of the game, I had kind of fallen into the role of doing the PR, simply because standing in front of people and being enthusiastic was something that I'm very good at. So I was like, yay, excellent, okay, hang on, what? And so we had a couple of meetings with Max Clifford. I spoke to him, or I spoke to Sean, who was the guy handling our particular case. And so we had a piece put in the News of the World, and it was classic because it was like, it's, hello, Kelvin, it's Max. All right, we've got this game. Yeah, video game. Yeah, for kids. So you steal cars, run over people, and shoot policemen in the face. I know, it's disgusting. I'll send you details. And so that's how it worked. All of a sudden, we had a whole one-page piece in the News of the World, and they wanted to write about somebody. And I went to Dave Jones and said, Dave, we've got a piece in the News of the World. He went, okay. I went, they want to talk to you. He was like, absolutely no way, ever, over my dead body. I'm like, okay. Keith, you're the head of the team. How about you? Would you want to? No. Ian, you're the lead artist? No. So in the end, it was me, because I was the PR guy. So there was a picture of me in a BMG interactive sweatshirt, scowling at the camera in black and white. And, they turned a real incident into a Grand Theft Auto-esque escape from the police. And the real story is that I had once been driving to work, my previous work, and hit a patch of black ice and skidded, and my car hit a tree, my 1 litre mini Metro. And they turned this into a high-speed pursuit over Knock Hill, because I did drive over the actual hill, not the racing circuit, but they turned it into a high-speed pursuit of my turbocharged XR3i around Knock Hill, with the police chasing me. It's lucky I didn't have drugs in the car, sneered Baglow. So my parents were absolutely appalled. My dad wanted to sue, and I'm like, you can't really sue, since I actually did give them the story. They just, may have blurred the lines of truth slightly in that way they do. And so that was really the kickoff. And that got so much traction because at that time in the UK, we didn't have, the disgust and outrage about Mortal Kombat or Night Trap that they had in the US. This was homegrown. So I still remember it was Lord Campbell of Croy who led the charge into demanding that this sick filth be banned. And after that, it was a pile-on. Everybody wanted to decry what we were doing, bringing about the fall of civilization. It's like we're destroying the morals of an entire generation. It's like society's going to collapse. Flames, cats and dogs living together. It was all going to be horrible. And we found it tremendously funny because that's not where we were going. We didn't set out to create a game that was massively controversial. We wanted to create a game that was fun. And at the end of the day, we think we had managed that. And we had actually been getting an awful lot of feedback from people. And the fact that the game kept selling and selling and selling and selling and then not dropping off a cliff like most of the other games did. So over the course of a year, it just kept going. So we knew that people were enjoying it. It was all down to kind of word of mouth. So the marketing from BMG kind of gave it that kickstart, but that's not sustainable. You can't keep outrage going. It was hilarious. It was funny because we knew that there was nothing that bad in the game. Everything in there was implied. Even the bad language was reasonably minimal, apart from 4-Letter Love, the heavy metal track, which did, I admit, have all of the 4-letter words that I knew in it. Written about Shirley Manson from Garbage. There's a fact that nobody knows, but it's true.
Well, I certainly remember seeing it on the news and all of our mates and then immediately going, where can we get this game? But later on, DMA Designs actually turned into Rockstar Games. And I guess that was before GTA 2. So what was that kind of period like? And
it was a very, very strange period because before Grand Theft Auto came, now hang on, let me get my timings right. Because DMA Design was bought by Gremlin, the developer and publisher based in Sheffield. So they acquired the entire company. But obviously they didn't have the intellectual property for Grand Theft Auto. And so after the first game came out and was a success, I actually moved on. I left the company and joined Rockstar. So I got to go out to New York and learn the Rockstar way, which was very interesting. There was an awful lot more work and an awful lot less partying than I thought Rockstars would have put up with. But hey, you live and learn. So during that time, DMA got bought by Gremlin. Gremlin in turn then got bought by Infogram. Infogram, I think, got bought by Atari, and then Atari collapsed. And it got very complicated. Anyway, long story short is that Take-Two eventually bought Grand Theft Auto and kind of more or less bought the team. And the team, they decided to disband DMA Design and turn it into Rockstar North in Edinburgh. Forgive me if I'm missing some of the nuances and subtleties in this. It was quite a long time ago. And even then, there were some very interesting things because I moved back from Take-Two, not in New York, but from Windsor, because going from the city that never sleeps to the centre of Trumpton was a bit traumatic. But I moved back up to Dundee because Rockstar was going to merge Rockstar Games and DMA Design and an Israeli technology company called Broadband Studios to create a brand new company called Pixel Broadband, and they were going to Grand Theft Auto was going to be the sort of the crown jewels, but they were focusing on this technology platform that would allow you to create a game and then publish it to many platforms. So it was almost a prototype Unity or prototype Unreal Engine, but way years before that was going to happen. And the IPO never came off. The IPO didn't happen. So I was left in the office in Dundee decommissioning what used to be DMA Design. So, all the desks went in one office. It's like the Silicon Graphics kit went in another office. And there were about 4 of us, me and the testers, who were left sitting at desks looking at each other and downloading ridiculous amounts of music and games through our T1 internet connection. I did go into work at Rockstar North briefly at the start of GTA 3, but obviously as the PR guy I was at that point, they weren't going to need me until the very end of the game, and then they decided that the wall of silence was the best PR approach, so I doubt I would have had much to do anyway, and the new writer didn't want to hear from me, so I was like, yeah, screw you guys. I'm going to go and work in mobile games. That's the coming thing.
Well, you later worked at Denki Limited, and obviously there's a lot of ex-DMA staffers there as well. I mean, do you generally kind of cross paths with these guys, throughout the years in other companies?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge amount of crossover, and an awful lot of the people who worked at DMA and worked on Grand Theft Auto in particular have gone on to do some really interesting things and are still involved in the games industry in so many different ways, shapes and forms, not just across Scotland and the UK, but out, worldwide, really. I still run into all of the people based in Scotland on a fairly regular basis. I run the Scottish Games Network, which is the industry body for Scotland's video game sector. And so I talk to an awful lot of the studio heads out there. And many of them are ex-DMA design people. And then out across the world, the alumni are out there, and they're working for an awful lot of the biggest companies, not just in video games, but out into the wider tech, interactive, virtual and augmented reality companies, you name it. There's a big diaspora. But, let's see, 2 years, it'll be 25 years. I think it's time for a reunion. I think we should find a sponsor to bring us all together, and we can all pontificate together like, old men.
You also ran DigiFYI as well. That's a really interesting kind of website that covers Scottish tech news. Why do you think there was a lack in Scottish tech news and information about the Scottish gaming scene?
Well, I think there's an awful lot of really good work that's being done up here. There are some incredibly technically talented people, some very creative and driven people. We've got a lot of really good founders and entrepreneurs and very good ideas, but we suffer from a problem of being a little bit, Scottish, which means that we don't always want to stand up, stick our heads above the parapet and shout about what we're doing. So the reason I set up the Scottish Games Network, the reason I joined Digit, was particularly to try and highlight some of the amazing work that's being done up here, because we do have this tendency to hide our light under a bushel, or downplay it to the point where you can be talking about the next huge big $1 billion tech unicorn, and the people that you're talking to in the pub just go, oh yeah, Brian does, I don't know what he did. He said something that was digital, and you have no idea what the heck is going on. So I joined the team at Digit as a staff writer, then as the editor, really to kind of kickstart the whole digital tech news channel, and try to sort of show people that there's so much going on up here. Across all of the major cities, Edinburgh in particular, the startup scene is booming. We've got more companies than ever before coming through and doing amazing things. And video games is still at the heart of it. We've now got incredible companies who are building technology for games. So a couple of good examples would be Delta DNA and Chili Connect. So they started off building platforms for games. Delta DNA does analytics for game developers and publishers, and Chili Connect is live ops. And they both got acquired by Unity. So they're being integrated into the world's biggest gaming platform, even as we speak. That's huge. That's fantastic. And it still shows that Scotland has this real pioneering edge. But if you're looking at the sort of the mainstream press, or even the digital and technology press, you're going to miss all of it. And the same with the Scottish Games Network. We've got some incredible companies up here doing some fantastically good work. But the only way you would find out about it is if you follow the managing director on Facebook and you happen to see the post going, oh yeah, by the way, our last game got 2 million downloads. Just so you know. You're like, what? 2 million downloads? That sounds like news to me. God damn it. It's like, why won't you tell me these things? And so there's a real, I guess, issue with, it's not self-confidence, but just telling people what you're doing. And so this is one of the things that I'm really sort of passionate about helping and trying to sort of showcase all of the good work that's being done up here, because once you start digging into it, once you start looking into all of the things that are being done up here, we have absolutely world-class studios. We have world-class companies and developers and some great creative people. And I just think they need to be shouted about a little bit more, even if I have to do it at knife point.
Well, you did mention the Scottish Games Network, and people can check that out online at scottishgames.net. I mean, are there any kind of Scottish games that we should be looking out for, or any that have come out recently, or that are coming up soon?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are some fantastically good ones. One of the studios that you really should have on your radar is an outfit in Glasgow called No Code. and No Code have done games like Observation and Stories Untold. They've won more awards than I think they know what to do with. They had to move into a longer office just so they had space to put all the trophies down. But they're doing some absolutely phenomenal work. Hyperluminal Games in Dundee, Hunted Cow up in Elgin, are doing an awful lot with MMORPGs. You know, in Elgin, which is in the Highlands, the middle of nowhere, we really do have an extraordinary range of people. You know, everyone knows about Rockstar, everyone knows about 4G Studios and Minecraft, but the rest of the sector kind of, again, flies under the radar. So I've just picked up a research grant to go out and actually map the sector in Scotland and see who's out there. Not just the studios and the tech companies, but the freelancers, the individual creators, the indies, the hobbyists, the whole lot, just to really try and capture for the first time ever exactly what it is that we've got. Because at the moment we're criminally, short-sighted about talking about the rest of the world. So yeah, watch this space. I've got strong suspicion there's a lot of people out there doing some incredible things that even I don't know about yet.
Well, Brian, it's been incredible to talk about all this amazing activity that's been happening in gaming north of the border, both past, present and future. So I'll put a link to the Scottish Games Network in our show notes if people want to check that out. But it's been amazing talking to you. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your stories with us this week.
It's been absolutely my pleasure, guys. Anytime at all.